Hello everyone and welcome to Jigyasa Analytics webinar Unlocking Insights, AI and Synthetic Data in Donor Subscription Analytics. My name is Krishna Mehta and today I will be sharing with you some ways in which we can use AI and synthetic data to improve the predictive analytics we do for fundraising as well as for subscription analytics. So let us start by going through some of the challenges we face when we are working in these areas. So the first thing is a lot of situations the data is sparse. There might be pocket of customers who are very good for the business, but we might not have enough data for them. So, there could be some types of donors, very high value donors, for whom we don't have enough data, and that hinders our ability to extract insight and put in our predictive algorithms to identify them better. Then there is the cold start problem. We might be new to market, or the nonprofit or the business might be new to start off with. There might be a new product. For all of this, there might be not enough historical data, and so sophisticated and outreach programs might be harder to put in place for them unless enough data has come through. And so there is this period over which we might be doing suboptimal outreach and donor or customer management. Then there is the churn prediction difficulty. There is a lot of variability in user engagement, and these patterns are often confounded by external things or business specific things, and all of these lead to situations where it becomes very hard to predict churn effectively for all customers, and due to which a lot of times our strategies are reactive rather than uh, proactive. So we are trying to go after customers who have left rather than trying to prevent them from stopping their subscription or stopping giving fund to the organization. Ideally, we should uh, prevent this event from happening. And then there is also the reactivation challenge. When we are going after customers or donors who have lapsed, uh, there might not be enough data and insights into why they have lapsed, especially for older customers. And all that might hinder our reactivation strategy. Let me briefly talk to you now about why traditional models fall short. So, the first thing is that traditional models rely on static algorithms built on historical data. So, in an environment where uh, things are dynamic and they change, patterns of customer behavior evolve, these static models will not do as well. And so that is one limitation. And then as we use expert selection or some model to drive our different activities on fundraising or customer retention or customer acquisition, over time a bias builds up. Whether it is the expert selection or the model driven selection, we are pre-selecting a certain portion of our population or customer base to do the uh, actions of solicitation or retention. Because of that, over time, uh, uh, a certain another portion of the population gets neglected, and we do not have any insights on them. So when we will want to expand our universe, we cannot do that effectively. A very simple example is, say, we are working with a women's magazine and doing some direct mail campaigns. So we typically would say, okay, women and older women will work very well here. And so we reach out to women over 65 years of age. And because we are doing this over time, we do not have any insights on men who might be interested in this title for some reason, or yeah, how to bring in a younger audience for this title. And any analytics we do will be misleading on that. So this is a simple example, but more complex examples also creep in, which are more subtle and harder to detect without advanced algorithms. And then a third issue which is related to all of this but needs to be discussed is the limitation of traditional algorithms to handle complexity of user or donor behavior. And the reason for that is a lot of the traditional algorithms are linear, and so they're very good at picking up the general average trends, but there might be sub pockets of customers or donors who have a very different dynamic. Uh, but they are not big enough to be caught in the general algorithm. And we lose a lot of that when we go with a traditional method. And the traditional method is very useful, but uh, it is not as good in picking up some of these subtle underpinnings of the data. So let us now talk about how AI can help with some of these issues, which we just discussed. So machine learning transforms how organizations understand and engage with their audiences, unlocking patterns invisible to traditional models. And that is how machine learning, which is kind of a subset of AI, can help with a lot of these challenges. So, first of all, we said that customer behavior is complex and we need to have good segmentation as a first step for our analytics exercise. Machine learning can help us get richer segmentation of our customer, and so our marketing or fundraising efforts or customer retention efforts will be more precise and accurate. And then uh, the models we actually build on these segments will have greater accuracy in terms of predicting, say, churn, or forecasting the lifetime value of the donor, or whatever exercise we are looking to do in that specific case. And between that better segmentation and more accurate models within those segments, we have superior outcomes. And then there is this need for dynamic personalization. Uh, there is a lot of data, a lot of real-time data available to organizations now, and AI allows you to do some of that dynamic personalization. Uh, Basically, be able to use AI technologies, often agentic AI, to incorporate a lot of the dynamic response to in real time and be better prepared to handle situations in customer acquisition or donor churn or any other business case you have which you are trying to tackle with analytics. Let us now talk about synthetic data. So what is synthetic data? Synthetic data is artificially created data that accurately represents the statistical properties and patterns of real data sets. Uh, it is generated using AI. Generative AI can be used. There are simulation techniques that can be used to develop it, as well as other AI techniques can be used to generate it. We have a separate webinar on our YouTube channel on synthetic data. And then why would we want to use synthetic data? One of the key benefits of using synthetic data is situations where data is sparse. So we do not have enough data for a segment of customers or donors. If we can synthetically generate data for them, we can generate insights and even models on them. And then there might be biases in our sample, as we talked about before. We only targeted a certain age group, and we go to younger age groups, we have very little data on them. So how about we use these synthetic data generation techniques to create more data points for them and then use them in our analysis or models. And then there is this whole paradigm of customer privacy which we must honor. There are regulations around it, GDPR, CCPA, and other states in the United States are coming up with their own regulations. To the extent we can use synthetically generated data to do our analysis and models, we are less constrained by these regulations and we can be in compliance of them a lot easier without having to not do our analytics. And so the role synthetic data will play in general, and we are adopting it in our operations and doing it on a regular basis now, is around model training, improving the accuracy of the model, improving the segmentation we do, as well as to the extent we are reducing the bias, we are making our models more robust and stable. And it has applications all across the spectrum, but some very important applications in subscription analytics as well as donor analytics. Let me now talk to you about some of the ethical and regulatory constraints and considerations around using synthetic data. So, responsible implementation of synthetic data requires careful attention to the details and thought on what the implications of applying it are in your situation. Let's talk about the ethical uh, implications first of fairness, of transparency. Okay, to the extent certain groups might be uh, eliminated from your sample. You know, you might not be serving a certain section of customers. It's just maybe certain minorities are underrepresented in your sample, and you take your sample as is and generate synthetic data, then your synthetic data will reflect that sample and propagate the same bias. And so the minorities who are not represented in your sample will continue to be not represented in your synthetic data as well. But if you again go back and study your sample carefully and you say and you see that certain genders or certain races are not there in your sample and you or are underrepresented, and you pull them out and build synthetic samples with those underrepresented groups, then you are helping to mitigate that uh, bias and reduce the samples skewing towards a certain ethnic group or certain age group, all of that. So you can use synthetic data to propagate some of the problems in your data, or with careful use actually mitigate those problems. And that is why the careful thought is needed upfront. And then there is the regulatory compliance issue. I'm not getting into the details of how synthetic data is generated in this webinar. It is more an application webinar, but we have webinars on that on our YouTube channel. But on very briefly, you need to have a starter sample to generate the synthetic sample. So how are you getting that starter sample? That's an important question that we need to understand and ensure that we are in compliance there. Uh, and we are not violating consent of consumer in creating that starter sample. And once we have used that starter sample to generate the synthetic data, uh, that synthetic data is anonymous, cannot be tied to any individual, and there are tests we can do to make sure that it cannot be traced back to any individual and it is truly synthetic. And once we are satisfied with those tests, then only we take it out and do additional analysis with that. And if we do that, we are in complete regulatory compliance. And then there is this issue of bias and validation. While I have said that synthetic data can help reduce the bias, it can also propagate bias, because if you overly rely on previously generated synthetic data, then it is representing what your world was before. And to the extent your environment is dynamic, it is again falling into the trap of static models and not taking in what is the current state of the world. And because of that, there is this constant need to refeed and rebuild your samples with new data to and validate your samples on new data to make sure that your data is relevant, because without that your analysis and your models will not be relevant. And in all of this, you realize it's synthetic, not real data, and you are doing all these sophisticated techniques. You're applying them to generate them, to make sure they are not biased, to make sure they're still relevant. And all of this needs user trust and buy-in, and therefore you need to constantly uh, explain, prove, show results, track and show results to the user group to make sure that there is buy-in on what is a very useful analytics tool available to us now. Let me now talk to you about a case study of applying AI and synthetic data for donor re-engagement. In particular, I want to talk to you about long-last donors. These are donors who lapsed maybe 5 years to 7 years ago. We did a cross-sectional study and found that if you look at these long lost donors, and our study also included subscribers as well, what we found was that you could extract up to 5% response rates out of them. Now, even think of that number. How many of our acquisition campaigns can reach those levels? And so there is this big opportunity available to us to look at the forgotten file, that old donors or old subscribers, and try to reactivate them. And yet there is a challenge that data on them is sparse. We have not solicited them. We have solicited very few of them. And so we cannot build a good model around them. So the solution here is by generating synthetic data and using machine learning techniques which are good at building models with scarce data. As a combination of these, we can build re-engagement models for these often forgotten donors or subscribers. And we did sample study on this, and what we found is that uh, using these building these models, uh, as opposed to just soliciting them randomly just we found a 25 to 30% improvement in response rate uh, because we use these sophisticated techniques uh, on this long lapse donors or subscribers. And uh, there was there was a almost multiple of three efficiency gain which comes from uh, doing smarter targeting on that in this group, and then reallocating the resources to other campaign priorities as well. Let me now talk to you about another case study. This is for a digital food brand, and we are talking about a customer retention or churn model here. So the first thing we did here was we did a life cycle segmentation for the customers there, because customers churn behavior varies by what stage they are in their life cycle. There are these very early these churners who are going to churn within a few days of coming in or within a week or so. And then there is this ongoing churn which happens throughout the life cycle. And then there is the end of term churn when people are not going to renew the subscription. And uh, and then there are some subtleties around these different groups as well, which I'm not getting into right now. But uh, the ability to segmentation significantly improve the accuracy and enable targeted intervention, because not only is your intervention strategy going to be different depending on the life cycle, but also the dynamics driving it, the drivers of the model are different. So if this segmentation proved very useful. And then there is the behavioral data element to this. We analyzed email engagement, which were being sent. There were emails being sent to the customers, and there were patterns around engagement for this. Um, Opens, clicks, uh, and then there is the actual engagement with the product. How often they log in, when they log in, what are the patterns, what are the change in patterns around all of this, and if purchase patterns around any transaction they might be doing, and using these we build models to optimize um, the predictions for each of these segments. Now, one challenge we faced as we were going around this is, so our segmentation was uh, very nuanced. We were looking at certain behavioral patterns. We were looking at life cycle segmentation, and trying to create uniform pockets where the dynamics of churn were similar. But in doing that, we were identifying pockets which were very sparse, and we had very little data, and but they were important segments all the same. And so for these segments, what we did is we uh, use synthetic data generation techniques to augment the data for these groups. And all this sophisticated segmentation, use of behavioral data, synthetic data techniques, all this improved the performance of the churn program by 20 to 35% depending on which segment you were looking at, and it dramatically improved the retention rates because of that, and helped reduce subscriber loss. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I hope you found the webinar useful. We look forward to seeing you again in one of our future webinars. And We will now open up for question and answers.